Good afternoon, and welcome to our Q&A session around enterprise architecture and focusing specifically on some of the things that we're doing in the upcoming Enterprise Architecture Summits coming in London on May 20th and 21st, and in Grapevine, Texas, just outside of Dallas, on June 3rd and 4th. With me today, I have Phil Allega. Phil is a Managing Vice President with Gartner, and I'm Brian Burke. I'm a Research Vice President with Gartner. And so what we wanted to talk about today is, well, first of all, I wanted to remind you of the summits coming up and say that we hope to see you there. Just tell you a little bit about the summits. This year, we're really focusing on two different areas in the summit. We're focusing on the best practices in enterprise architecture to really help you to become excellent in your job. And we're also focusing on the emerging trends and technologies that are driving digital business. So not only how do you do your job, but what are the key trends and technologies that are going to be affecting enterprise architects going into the future. So Phil, we have some questions that were sent in by email, and Anna has been kind enough to load those up already. So we'll start with those. If you'd like to submit a question and you have a Google account, you'll see the question and answer bar on the right-hand side. You click submit, ask a new question, type the question in, and then click submit. And if you see a question already there that you'd like us to answer, you can click on the +1, and that will help to vote it up. And if you don't have a Google account, you can email your question to Anna Lewis. It's anna.lewis, ANNA.LEWIS @Gartner, GARTNER.com. Okay, Phil, so we have some questions. Why don't we start with those? First question, how are business capability models different from business process models? Phil, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a common question, Brian. People tend to get confused between the difference of a capability and a process. And it's just because we have the word business in front of it doesn't make it one and the same. So let's talk about business capabilities first. So a business capability is essentially, give an example. So let's imagine you had a marketing department. Well, the marketing department has a capability of marketing, right? And so it's changing the noun to a verb so that we can, in effect, lay over business processes across the capability that may come from many different parts of the organization, not just the marketing department. So it takes a number of different individuals with from different parts of the organization to enact a capability via maybe multiple processes inside an organization.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation, Phil. The easy way I like to sum that up is that a business capability describes what you do, and a business process describes how you do it. Business capabilities are, comprised of people and systems and assets, and business processes span multiple business capabilities. And so I think it's it's really a question of what you do versus how you do it. Okay, let's move on to the next question. What is the best EA framework to use? Phil, what's your thoughts on that?
Tom, and there are a number of folks out there that do believe in one versus another, and there's a lot of proponents of the variety of different frameworks that are in existence. But what we find at Gartner is that leading practitioners make their own. They take a little bit from various frameworks and methodologies that help them solve their problems to deliver their business outcomes, not necessarily fulfill the requirements of an individual framework or methodology itself. Brian, do you have more to add?
Yeah, I think that the important thing is that the framework is your framework. You can't simply take a framework off of the shelf and apply it directly in your organization. It needs to be customized for your needs. So the best framework, regardless of which of the many frameworks you choose, the best framework for you is the customized version of whatever framework you choose. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And here's a question from Virginia Arahu. I apologize, Virginia, if I didn't pronounce your name correctly. But how to value ITIL on enterprise architecture. What are your thoughts on that, Phil?
ISACA via COBIT has suggested that ITIL and the enterprise architecture linked together are actually much stronger. When we look out across our client base, we see very few folks who have actually spent some time trying to link the two together. So on the one hand, we're looking at the design and planning activities from the enterprise architecture efforts that then become physical and operationalized when we start looking at the ITIL. We've seen a number of individuals create the handoffs in between the two. So for example, both call for a connection out to the business strategy or indeed the business outcome that's desired for the organization. But that's best served by having the enterprise architecture team make that connection directly. And when it comes to taking the more conceptual or logical guidance and driving it down to the physical layer, that's really where the ITIL folks are best suited to take that and operationalize that and inform the enterprise architects of what has become of those solutions once they become physical and part of the current state environment that's under operation. Unfortunately, Brian, we just don't have enough information to be able to identify where are the best practices for those handoffs because so few people actually do it.
Very good point. A very good point indeed, Phil. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And it is, what is the impact of digital business on enterprise architecture? And I think it's a great question. I think that digital business is going to have a tremendous impact on enterprise architecture. In fact, I think that the trends and technologies that are driving digital business are going to have perhaps even more of an impact on organizations than the internet did back in the late 1990s. And I recall in the 1990s, enterprise architects running around with their hair on fire saying, we need an internet strategy, we need an internet strategy. What I expect in the coming years is enterprise architects running around with their hair on fire saying, we need a digital business strategy, we need a digital business strategy. So I think that the impact on organizations and the impact on enterprise architects is going to be profound. We might even think of it as the internet on steroids. What are your thoughts, Phil?
So one of the ways to think about this is how your industry is going to approach and change their business model given all of these disruptions. I'd say, Brian, in the last 15 years, in one way, IT's been kind of boring. It's been a little staid. We've been focused on a lot of our back office applications, managing our ERP solutions. We've had a few things pop up here and there, a little bit of cloud, a little bit of fun, a little bit of mobile. But now we're really taking that up another notch because the type of technology disruptions that are affecting us right now is like, for example, with the Internet of Things or with smart machines, even including various types of robotics that are in place today, solutions that are eliminating the box. I'm on a box with a QWERTY keyboard, and there are many solutions today that are involved just audio and video in order to interact with the computer, as it were. So these are completely changing our boundaries and completely changing the opportunities to change the way in which you interact with your home, the way in that you interact with the city that you live in, the way computing interacts with you in your life, and the way you interact with computing within the workplace as well. So there are just unbelievable step changes that are occurring. This is an exciting time to be in IT and an exciting time to be an enterprise architect to help our businesses take advantage of and understand what these new innovation opportunities may mean for them. I'd say, unfortunately, however, we don't really know what all the answers are because it's such a new greenfield environment to go out and play in, which means innovation really comes to fore for enterprise architects. What do you think about that, Brian?
I think you're absolutely right. I really do. I think that it's going to have a profound impact on organizations. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And the next question is security architecture a dimension of enterprise architecture? And I guess the reference there is there's four commonly used dimensions of enterprise architecture. So business, information, solutions, and technology. And some organizations use security architecture as well. And there's different kinds of slices that organizations take. I think that, security architecture, it actually spans all of those four dimensions. There are business processes related to security architecture, certainly information, applications, and technology. And it's sort of bits and pieces of lots of the other dimensions. So I would say that security architecture is a viewpoint of enterprise architecture that highlights the security aspects within an enterprise architecture, but I don't see it as a separate dimension such as the business, information, solutions, and technology. What's your thoughts on that, Phil?
So we've seen a number of different focal points on this, and then there are indeed clients of ours who have taken security architecture and made it its own viewpoint to enterprise architecture to highlight its level of importance, so that it's not just an attribute of business processes, information flows, technologies, applications, and solutions. It has actually got its own crystal clear focus. And this has really come to the fore in a number of industries who've been concerned or possibly even battered by security issues within their organization.
Okay, good. Well, let's move on to the next question. And the next question is, can external consultants be trusted? Sorry, let me start that again. Can external consultants be trusted to define our enterprise architecture? And I want to turn that one over to you, Phil.
Well, so this cuts a number of different ways. Now, when we're looking organizations in the development of a business outcome driven enterprise architecture today, and in fact, many of them clearly talk the talk and walk the walk, and so they're there to assist. But at the end of the day, you really have to own your own enterprise architecture. You cannot abdicate the responsibility for them to develop it for you, because they'll leave and you'll still be there. You can use them to augment and assist and even bring in that transfer of knowledge to help you in the development of your enterprise architecture program. But at the end of the day, you really must own that.
Okay, good. I think you're absolutely right. Certainly, consultants can come in and help, but ultimately, you can't abdicate responsibility for enterprise architecture. Okay,
Brian, could I jump in on that one just for that? That may not always be obvious to folks. At Gartner, we see the EA consultancy market is about a US $3 billion market. That's billion with a B, Brian. And that's a big number. That tells us that there's a lot of people out there who are actively engaged in using their consultancies to assist them in delivering business outcome driven enterprise architecture. Now, let's compare that, of course, to what we see in the tool market, which is vastly smaller by about 10 times less in size than the consultancy market. So it's clear to us that consultancies, from the point of the buyer who's engaging in the development of their EA program, they find consultancies to be very important to them.
Okay, and I just want to remind viewers at this point, for anyone who's joined us a little bit late, if you're logged into your Google account, you'll see the question bar on the right, and you can submit your question there. If you're not logged into your Google account, you won't have the question and answer bar, and you can submit a question via email to Anna Lewis. It's Anna, A-N-N-A .Lewis, L-E-W-I-S, at Gartner.com. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. And the next question is, how can we define and communicate the business value of enterprise architecture? And let me start by saying that, enterprise architecture, a lot of times enterprise architects are focused on doing enterprise architecture and not the value that enterprise architecture is delivering to the organization. And by refocusing on business outcomes, first of all, that directs your focus to the value that enterprise architecture is delivering for the organization. So that's really the first step. But in terms of the value of enterprise architecture, there's the real value to the organization is that we are influencing how the organization is evolving. So influencing change. And we do that in one of two ways. We influence change by either initiating projects or providing guidance to projects in their formative stages. We also influence change by ensuring that projects are compliant with principles, standards, and guidelines, so that we are not increasing complexity over time. And so in terms of the real impact of enterprise architecture on the organization, it comes through project initiation and through providing guidance through projects throughout the course of the project. And so that's where the rubber meets the road. So we need to focus a lot less on inventorying technologies and inventorying applications. I mean, those are all things that we might need to do to actually have a result that matters to the business. But it's that influence of enterprise architecture on organizational change that's the real value of enterprise architecture. What's your thoughts on that, Phil?
Right. So when you're engaged as an enterprise architect and assisting your organization, you're helping them plan for and manage change that they want to have happen in order to deliver a business outcome for them. It's yes, indeed, one could use enterprise architecture to identify some standards and to possibly clear out some older technologies. But I could do that without having an enterprise architecture program in place, because that's change that is manageable in the near term. Change that is difficult to manage are the big changes that affect the entirety of the enterprise writ large. And that's where enterprise architecture really comes into its own. The very interesting thing to note, Brian, is on a maturity scale of 1 to 5, where 1 and 2 are having a little bit of difficulty, and 3 is where the enterprise architecture program begins to get set in, and 5 would be in its optimal state. Those from level 3 and above don't ask us questions about value because they know what they're focused on, and they're delivering on those business outcomes that the organization wants to have. Those at level 1 and 2 are concerned about whether or not they're going to be around next year to be still working on enterprise architecture, because the program is just starting up and they really haven't narrowed themselves down to the right focus point that's going to deliver value for the organization.
Okay, great answer. Great answer, Phil. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, pick one here. Okay, is enterprise architecture still relevant as we're moving as an organization to cloud services? What's your thoughts on that, Phil?
Yeah, I think it's rather interesting question in that it makes the assumption that if I don't have an IT organization working on IT things in the company, that I don't have a need for enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture is clearly more than technology, and in fact, one could say that moving those things to the cloud is just an application of that technology in a different location than within the 4 walls of my business. And indeed, as we look out at over many of the different types of solutions that are in place today, they take clear advantage of cloud to provide big data opportunities, to provide advanced analytic opportunities that don't need to be in-house, that can still be managed externally and yet still deliver business outcomes for the business processes and the information flows that need to occur for the organization. As the enterprise architect, it's not just about where the technology lies. It's about the inclusion of all of these particular viewpoints in understanding how to deliver business value to my organization.
Yeah, I agree with that, Phil. I think that it certainly, with the introduction of cloud services, it changes the nature of some of the things that we're doing as enterprise architects. We probably, if we're having software as a service in the organization, we probably don't need to worry too much about what specific technologies that software is running at the service provider. So there are some concerns that go away, but some new concerns that are added around how do we manage security, or how is security managed, how is disaster recovery managed, and all of those other issues that we look at in our internal organizations, but we also need now to look at those from our service provider perspective to ensure that they have the appropriate controls in place. So it does change the nature of enterprise architecture, but I don't think that it makes enterprise architecture irrelevant by any means. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And here it is. Okay, I've attended the London Summit before. Can you tell me what new content you'll be discussing this year? Actually, we have a lot of new content that we'll be discussing this year. Virtually all of it is new. Not that we've eliminated, the themes that we've been developing over the past years, like business outcome-driven enterprise architecture, but we are really refocusing the summit on more shifting towards being the Gartner Summit for enterprise architects, as opposed to the Enterprise Architecture Summit. And let me tell you what that really means. We're shifting to providing the kinds of insights that enterprise architects need to do their jobs. And with the age of digital business, those insights are a lot around these emerging technologies that are really driving digital business. So we have a number of presentations on 3D printing, the Internet of Things, smart machines, big data and analytics. And so not just about enterprise architecture, but also about those trends and technologies that are driving enterprise architecture. And that's going to be entirely new this year. So your thoughts on that, Phil?
It's clear to us that leading practitioners have shifted to looking at the emerging and strategic technology trends that are affecting their organization. This is an exciting time to be an enterprise architect, and it's great for us to be able to expose those leading and, next practices to folks that may be new to enterprise architecture, folks that are just getting settled in, and folks that are actually looking to take their enterprise architecture program onto the next level and the next challenge.
Okay, terrific. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, what is the difference between foundational and vanguard enterprise architecture roles? This is a great question. The concept of a vanguard enterprise architect is something that we introduced in our predicts for 2014, so last year, where we're looking at what we were seeing is that the role of enterprise architecture is really bifurcating. It's splitting into two, where we have some enterprise architects that are focused on, more of the traditional, what we call foundational enterprise architectural role. And so they're planning for that evolutionary change in organizations. But we have a requirement. We've always had this requirement, but we have a new need to focus on what are the emerging technologies and innovations that we can exploit in our organization. And that's really a fundamentally different approach to enterprise architecture. And we call that a vanguard enterprise architecture role. Now, in a vanguard enterprise architecture role, what we're going to be focusing on and how we're going to be doing that work is looking at these emerging technologies, understanding what the use cases are for these emerging technologies, matching those use cases to business capabilities in our organization to really understand how can we apply these emerging technologies in our organization. So, regardless of what business you're in, I think that all of these technologies that we've talked about, 3D printing, Internet of Things, big data and analytics and other trends, they're going to have a significant impact on your organization. The question is, what is going to be that impact? Now, if you're going to be on the leading edge, you really need to assess those technologies as they're emerging, so that you can understand what is the potential impact for your organization. Had a conversation yesterday with a client in an engineering company, and we discussed, how they're looking at 3D printing. And 3D printing is very useful for engineering companies in terms of modeling, creating physical models of their designs. And so, and it's something that they're starting to look at now. And so regardless of the industry that you're in, I think that these emerging technologies are going to have an impact. And the role of Vanguard Enterprise Architecture is to look at those emerging technologies. And I want to say that that doesn't diminish the role of a foundational enterprise architect. It's not like one is better than the other. Foundational enterprise architects are the ones who are, going through the big transformational change in the organization. For example, a foundational enterprise architect is the person who is going to plan for the integration after a merger. Big job. The Vanguard Enterprise Architect is doing something completely different, in that they're looking at those emerging technologies and looking at how they're leveraged. So I think that the role is splitting. It doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be different people doing that work, but I think it needs to recognize that when you're wearing one hat, it's one type of work versus another hat is another kind of work. And I think that there are different choices. Now, a lot of organizations have had innovation within enterprise architecture for a long time. So they've effectively had this role of Vanguard Enterprise Architect. The reason that we call this out now is because with the number of technologies that are emerging today that are going to have an impact on organizations in the near future, we really wanted to highlight this role, the need for this role within organizations. So that's the difference between a foundational enterprise architect and a Vanguard Enterprise Architect. Two roles, sometimes two people, but not necessarily, but doing very different work. What are your thoughts on that, Phil?
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I'd like to underscore that both the foundational and the Vanguard Enterprise Architect are delivering business outcomes. So they're clearly focused on the things that are right for their organization. But I do think it's important to note that those who are not focused on delivering business outcomes may consider that they're not really doing enterprise architecture. And that's a clear differentiation that needs to be understood by those that are engaged in a true EA program these days.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Phil. I think we're out of time now. And I want to thank everybody for joining us, and just remind you again that we'll both be at the Enterprise Architecture Summits coming up in London on May 20th and 21st, and in Grapevine, Texas, near Dallas, on June 3rd and 4th. And we'd really love to see you there. So once again, thanks everybody for joining, and we hope to see you at the one or the other Enterprise Architecture Summit.